The night air was sharp with the rattle of a distant train, its whistle cutting through the darkness like a warning. On the cold stone of the station floor, a baby's cry rose thin and fragile, nearly swallowed by the echo of steel and smoke. Alone, yet not truly. Beside him stood a German shepherd, ribs pressing through a matted coat, eyes burning with both fear and defiance. The dog's ears flicked at every sound, every shadow. His body was trembling, but his stance was iron. No one would touch the child without going through him first. The baby's tiny fists reached toward the shepherd's fur, clutching, pulling, anchoring. Their breaths mingled, one fast and uneven, the other deep and watchful. Somewhere in that exchange, an unspoken vow was sealed. Survival would no longer belong to one, but to both. Then came the danger. Footsteps dragging through the platform, too slow, too heavy, carrying something far worse than curiosity. The German shepherd's lips curled, a growl reverberating through the baby's fragile bones. The world had left them both abandoned, but it would have to reckon with what love and loyalty could do in the dark. The station was nearly deserted, save for the hum of an old light flickering above the cracked benches and the faint metallic groan of tracks cooling under the night. The baby's cries had softened now into hiccuping whimpers, the kind that tugged at the air like invisible threads. His cheeks were damp, his breaths quick, his tiny body swaddled in a blanket far too thin for the cold that gnawed through the platform. Yet, he was not truly alone. The German shepherd hovered beside him, ribs visible beneath the tangled fur, tail lowered but not tucked. He was hungry, desperately so. His stomach growled in the silence, an ache he had learned to ignore for days. But when the child's small fist grasped at his coat, something inside him shifted. The hollow gnawing of hunger was replaced by something else, an instinct more ancient, more unyielding, protection. The dog lowered himself, pressing close enough so that the baby could rest his cheek against the rough fur. The infant's breathing steadied, comfort found in the heartbeat that thudded strong and sure beneath the shepherd's chest. For a moment, time seemed to the station clock ticked loudly overhead, every second marking how fragile this night was, how easily it could break. The shepherd's ears flicked at a sound in the distance, a bottle clattering, laughter echoing too harshly. He rose, placing his body squarely in front of the child, his muscles taut, his eyes fixed on the shadows stretching down the platform. But the figures never came closer. The sound faded, swallowed by the hum of the city beyond the track. Still, the dog remained alert, only lowering himself again when the silence returned. The baby cooed, the sound small and uncertain, yet it reached something deep in the shepherd's chest. He tilted his head, ears forward, studying the little face turned toward him. The child's eyes, wide and glistening in the pale station light, locked onto his, and in that gaze, innocent, unknowing, trusting, something wordless passed between them. The shepherd stretched out slowly, lowering his head until his nose brushed the baby's blanket. He inhaled, the scent foreign yet strangely familiar, like something he had once known but lost. He pressed closer, his warm breath washing over the baby's face, and the infant let out a soft giggle. It was the first sound of joy to touch the night. The shepherd's tail gave a small hesitant wave. They were both abandoned here, discarded by a world too careless to notice. But in each other, they had found something that neither had known they needed, a reason to keep breathing. The baby's eyes fluttered shut, sleep overtaking him with the safety of a guardian by his side. The German shepherd remained awake, his gaze shifting from shadow to shadow, every muscle on edge, ready to strike if danger came. He would not fail this small life pressed against him. The night deepened, a train thundered by, its lights flooding the platform in a brief blaze of gold. The baby stirred, startled, and whimpered. The shepherd nuzzled him gently, pressing his nose to the infant's cheek until the cries stilled again. The bond, silent, wordless, unbreakable, had taken root. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but in the fragile quiet of that abandoned station, two forsaken souls had chosen each other, and that choice would change everything. The morning came harsh and gray. Clouds hung low over the city, heavy with unshed rain, and the station seemed even more abandoned in daylight than it had in the dark. The cold steel rails gleamed faintly, stretching into nowhere, while the benches sagged under the weight of years of neglect. The baby woke first, his tiny whimpers rising as the thin blanket failed to keep away the chill. He shifted, his fists opening and closing in restless waves. The German shepherd lifted his head instantly, ears twitching, eyes already alert before his body moved. He leaned down, pressing his muzzle against the child's cheek. The baby's cries softened into small, breathy coos, but hunger was setting in for both of them. The shepherd's ribs ached with emptiness, every inhale a reminder of how long it had been since food touched his stomach. The baby, too, was growing weaker, his cries thinner, less forceful, and yet, when their eyes met, neither hunger nor despair was louder than the tether binding them together. The break came suddenly, footsteps, not the careless kind from the night before. These were heavy, deliberate, too close. The shepherd rose at once, body shifting in front of the child, his ears flattened, his lips curling, revealing the white flash of teeth. A growl rumbled deep in his throat, low but unmistakable. A man emerged from the far end of the platform. His coat was ragged, his face shadowed by an old cap. He carried a bottle in one hand, swinging it lazily, his steps uneven but his eyes sharp. They landed on the baby, then on the... Well, what do we have here? His voice slurred, but his intent cut like a blade. The shepherd's body stiffened. His tail was rigid, hackles raised. The man laughed, a hollow, ugly sound that echoed across the station. That mutt guarding some brat. I could fetch a pretty coin for both. The shepherd's growl grew louder, vibrating through the platform. He lowered his stance, legs braced, ready. The baby's soft whimper reached through the tension, and the dog's ears flicked, reminding him of what he stood for. The man stepped closer. The shepherd lunged. His bark exploded into the air, sharp and thunderous, startling pigeons into flight above the station. The man staggered back, dropping his bottle with a crash. Glass scattered, the sound ringing like alarm bells, but the man's shock turned quickly to rage. He pulled something from his pocket, a blade, small but glinting in the dim light. You want to play, mutt? Let's see how much you bleed. The shepherd barked again, louder this time, his teeth bared, his body refusing to yield an inch. He knew the danger, smelled it in the man's sweat, saw it in the way his hands tightened around the knife, but he also knew what lay behind him, the fragile bundle of life that depended on him. The baby began to cry, high-pitched and panicked, the sound cutting into the shepherd's chest. His heart thundered. The man stepped closer. The dog lunged again, snapping so close that the man jerked backward in fear. The train whistle shrieked in the distance, echoing through the station. For a split second, both man and dog froze, the sound swallowing the space between them. The man cursed under his breath, eyes narrowing, weighing his odds. Then, with a final glare, he spat onto the ground and turned, retreating back into the shadows from where he came. The shepherd didn't move until the sound of footsteps disappeared. Only then did he lower his stance, his chest heaving, his eyes still locked on the direction of the threat. He turned back, circling the baby, lowering his head to nuzzle the trembling child. The baby's cries slowed as the dog pressed close, wrapping his body around him again. The platform fell silent, broken only by the whistle of the departing train. It was in that silence that the truth settled. The world would not leave them in peace. Hunger, danger, abandonment, every shadow carried a threat, and the bond they had forged would be tested again and again. The break had come, and it was only the beginning. Dawn washed the station in the color of old tin. The weak light flattened everything. The benches, their chipped green paint, the posters peeled into rag curls, the frost-slicked tile. Cold pricked at the German shepherd's paws, an ache that had crept up through the night until it lived behind his joints. The baby stirred against the blanket, breath puffing in tiny clouds, fingers closing around a frayed loose thread like a lifeline. The dog lifted his head and listened. The world was waking, the far rattle of a delivery truck, the hollow cough of a scooter on the street above, gulls crying toward the river. A train's distant horn drifted over rails that disappeared into pale distance. None of those sounds meant immediate danger. None meant immediate help. The dog's body made decisions before his mind caught up. It was too open here, too visible. They had been lucky once. Luck had a habit of ending. He nosed the baby's cheek. The infant's eyes, drowsy and milk blue with sleep, found him and brightened. A coo rose like a thread of steam. The dog's tail twitched once. He lowered, let the baby's fingers press into the damp fur of his ruff, and then began to move the blanket with careful testing tugs. The first pull jostled the baby and he let out a startled cry. The shepherd froze, ears pressed back, an apology in the soft whine that escaped him. He waited until the tiny body settled, until the small hand found his fur again. Then he adjusted, teeth on cloth instead of skin. Weight shifted back through shoulders and chest, a slow drag rather than a yank. The blanket whispered across tile, The baby's eyes went wide at the movement, at the world sliding past. For a second he fussed, the sound thin, then a discovery curved his mouth. This, too, could be safe if the warm animal stayed in view. The shepherd kept his head low and close as he pulled, so the infant saw nothing but the familiar slice of him, the dark triangle of ear, the tremor of whiskers, the steady black of eyes that checked and checked again that he was still there. They made a slow, stubborn line toward the ramp at the end of the platform. Clear frost had glazed the concrete, making it glitter under the humming lights. The shepherd placed each paw deliberately, looking for dry patches for perch. The blanket snagged a cracked tile. He stopped and maneuvered, nudged the cloth free with a scrape of his teeth, and resumed. It was work that would have been nothing for a human. Scoop up the swaddled child. Lift, go. To the dog every inch was a negotiation with gravity and the cold. The station breathed in and out around them. A cleaner's cart squeaked on the far concourse, the scent of ammonia pulling at the dog's nose. He paused, chest low, watching the shadow pass behind a bank of ticket machines. The cart didn't turn their way. He moved again. At the ramp the angle changed. Pulling became dragging uphill. The shepherd dug in, hindquarters tensing, shoulders knotting hard under matted fur. The baby squeaked as the blanket bumped. The dog let go, stepped around to the side, nudged and smoothed, pressed his shoulder into the soft bundle until it lay flatter. Then he moved to the front again and hauled. Claws scraped on concrete, sound sharp and desperate. He closed his jaw further back on the cloth for more grip. His breath fogged the air and then blew apart with effort. The city appeared in slices, as they climbed first a band of street, then railings, then the lip of a sky the color of unpolished steel. The wind came in to look them over, colder up here, smelling of wet metal and exhaust. The baby made a mouse-small sound, face scrunching against the sting. The shepherd stepped to the side and formed a wall against the wind, his body taking it first. He trembled, then steadied. They reached the top. For a moment the dog stood motionless, surveying. Cars threaded past in a rhythm of brakes and sighs. A bus exhaled and lumbered away, leaving a wash of warm air and diesel. Beyond, the city opened in grids of alleyways and cut-throughs, a patchwork memory of scents he'd known once. Bread, meat, river, dog, a man whose hands had been firm and kind, before other hands, other voices, and then no hands and no voices at all. He searched for warmth, for cover, for any place where a small human could be hidden from sight and wind while he went to look for what the baby would need. He did not want to leave even for a heartbeat. The thought pushed a restless sound up from his chest, but hunger had sharpened into an urgent blade. The baby's cry had begun to fray at the edges, thinner than yesterday, more easily exhausted. There an underpass hollowed beneath the street, its brick mouth dark but not unfriendly. A vent above it spilled a steady wheeze of warm air from the belly of some building. Traces of old cardboard and a blanket told the story of last night's sleepers now gone. The shepherd guided the blanket bundle toward it, pausing at every unfamiliar noise. A scooter skittered too close. He turned and barked once, a warning that snapped the rider's head his way. The man swore and swerved, and the shepherd's body went still again, only when the engine's buzz thinned into distance. At the underpass, warmth met them like a tired hand, not enough to melt the world, but enough to take the bite from it. The shepherd maneuvered the blanket into an alcove between two pillars, pushing it with his chest and paws the way he might have nosed bedding in an old remembered crate. He circled once, then tucked his body along the open side so the baby lay in the crook of a living barricade. The infant watched him with furrowed brow, and then, as the vent's breath lifted a strand of hair on his forehead, sighed and relaxed. The dog stayed until the baby slept. He told himself he would stay until he could count 5 slow breaths, then 10. He counted 30. The city's pulse beat in the concrete under his paws. Above, footsteps hit the sidewalk in pairs and singles. A woman's voice, a man's short laugh. Somewhere, the jingle of a leash, the metallic music that made dogs look up as if their names had been called. He had to go. He rose, leaving the weight of his body pressed as long as possible along the blanket, so that the absence of it would be gradual, not a snap. The baby's hand opened and closed in sleep, searching the air for fur. The shepherd bent and pressed his muzzle softly against the small fingers. They found him and calmed. He nuzzled the blanket edges closer, tucking, until there were no corners for the wind to get under. Then he slipped into the street. Smells stacked into each other like cards in a hand. He sorted them, discarding the bright distractions. The hot brass scent of the bus's exhaust. The sugar burst from a bakery, until he hit the thread he needed. Water, thin and metallic, running somewhere it wasn't supposed to. He followed it to a broken-down spout that bled a slow, clear line across a moss-stained wall. He pressed his tongue to the metal where the water gathered in a lip, and drank enough to wet his mouth. He needed something to carry it. He looked around. Crushed cups lay under a bench, but they were torn through. A takeout lid with a low rim leaned against the curb. He nosed it. It wobbled more than he liked but held a thimble's worth when he balanced it flat. He clenched it between his teeth, jaw delicate, and tipped it under the trickle until a shallow pool caught the light. The trip back was a slow, careful ritual. Head level, steps smooth, the water trembling on every uneven patch. Twice it sloshed over, and he went back for more. On the third try he reached the underpass with a glimmer still in the lid. He set it down by the baby's mouth and licked his nose gently. The infant's tongue moved on instinct, tasting the cool against chapped lip. He wet a corner of the blanket and dabbed, clumsy but patient, until the baby's fussing eased. Food. The dog's gut twisted. He slipped away again, longer this time, toward the smell of dumpsters behind the bakery and diner. Rats scurried. He watched their routes, avoided their trail. In the metal bin's shadow, layered smells spoke of yesterday. Potato peels, the ghost of meat, a heel of bread. He jumped, scrabbled, pulled himself up. Inside, a paper bag. He tore it open and found a roll, stale but intact, and a handful of something sweet and sticky that pulled at his teeth. He took only what he could carry, and returned to the underpass with jaw set. The baby couldn't chew. The dog knew it the way creatures know the limits of young. He softened the bread with a little water, pressing it against the rough of his palate, until it broke into damp crust. He spat them out gently onto his paw and used his nose to push a tiny piece to the baby's lip. The infant mouthed, decided, swallowed. Relief flared through the shepherd like heat. He worked carefully, dangerously patient, stopping at the first sign of choke or cough, waiting, starting again. Between crumbs and sips, the baby's skin lost some of its grayness. His eyes grew less glassy, and began to follow light again. Outside, the morning matured into a busy, indifferent day. People crossed the street above the underpass without looking down. One did. A boy in a school uniform with a backpack sagging to one side. He leaned over the railing, spotted the dog curled like a fortress, and the small blinking face within it. His mouth opened. His hand went to his pocket. The shepherd stood in a smooth rise that made his size obvious. They regarded each other, one curious, one unwilling to let curiosity get any closer than the line where shadow met sun. The boy hesitated, then lifted his phone, pointed, lowered it again. He looked at the baby, then at the dog. "Good boy," he said in a soft tone that didn't carry. He pulled a sandwich from his bag, broke off half, and tossed it so it skidded into reach. The shepherd didn't move until the boy had gone, the footsteps pattering away. Only then did he nose the bread closer, sniff it, tear off the crusts, and save the soft core. He didn't eat until the baby had taken what he could of the damp crumbs. Only then did he step aside to chew the crusts, each bite a soldier's ration, each swallow accompanied by a glance at the sleeping small face. Rain threatened, and then delivered. It came in a slow, cold curtain that turned the street into a gloss and made the underpass's warm breath feel like a gift wrestled from a stingy god. The dog shifted his body to block the wind where it curled around the pillars. Water made a runnel at the edge of their alcove. He watched it like a sentry, until the flow found a different path. They lived the hours in small acts. The dog left and returned, never farther than 2 blocks, to the broken pipe, to the bakery's shadow, once to a deli where a woman with kind hands noticed him and crouched, palm out. He kept his distance, made a humming noise in his chest. She could feel more than hear, then turned and walked 2 steps, looked back,
She followed. Then she saw the bundle, and made a sound that was half prayer, half shock. Her eyes filled with questions. Her hand reached for her phone. The shepherd moved between her and the baby without teeth. It was a wall only. He held her gaze tail low, ears not flat but deciding. The woman's hand hovered. She looked at the baby again, at the damp hair pasted on the tiny forehead, at the matted dog who trembled but did not yield ground. "Wait," she whispered, voice small in the rain. "Just wait." She set the phone aside, and dug through her bag, pulled free a small bottle of water, and rolled it across the ground. The shepherd sniffed it, pawed, learned the screw cap with persistence, and teeth until it loosened enough to let a slow drip. He licked what spilled, then nudged the bottle toward the baby, tipping it so drops gathered on the infant's lip. The woman watched, body turned toward the street, as if expecting sirens at any second from a decision she hadn't made yet. "Okay," she said to the rain, to herself, to the animal who did not trust her but hadn't rejected her a second time. "Okay." She took a step back, holding up her hands. "I'll come back." The shepherd did not blink until she was gone, her silhouette dissolving into the wet city. Twilight came earlier than it should under rain. The dog's world shrank to the sound of the baby's breath and the hiss of tires. He closed his eyes for a count of 3, opened them for a count of 6. He dreamed quick and shallow, a field he had once run in, the feel of grass crisp under his pads, a whistle that had meant home. He woke with his face against the baby's blanket, and a new scent in the air. Storm turning to wind, wind carrying river. Danger never left. It only moved. A cluster of men gathered at the far end of the underpass, their voices high and brittle with the kind of energy that spills and breaks things. The dog rose into his stance, body making lines that meant
He did not bark. To bark was to bring attention. To bark was to call problems closer. He simply stood, and in the architecture of his body was both the story and the threat. "Here is mine, here is the line." The men laughed and went on. One tossed a piece of something that bounced and rolled to the dog's feet. He did not look at it. He waited until their steps turned watery in the rain, then used his nose to push the trash toward the gutter. He slept in slices and woke in urgency. He learned the rhythm of the baby's discomfort and shifted before the cry fully formed. He learned to make a cup of his body for warmth and a canopy of his head for quiet. He learned that if he hummed, deep and low, the boy-child's fists unclenched and the knot between his brows smoothed. The baby learned too. His eyes searched less and found more. His mouth didn't need to fight air as often to find breath. Once his hand traced the curve of the dog's ear with such deliberate wonder that the shepherd's chest hurt with it. Morning would come again, and with it choice stay hidden, until hunger drove them out. Risk the woman's return. Risk the attention that help often wears, badges, voices that command, separating hands. The shepherd would navigate those choices as he had navigated the ramp, foot by deliberate foot, with the weight of something precious pulling behind him, and the wind forever at his face. For now he counted breaths, not his, but the small, uneven ones that mattered more. He counted to 30, then to 60, then to a number he had no name for. Only a feel. Outside, the rain softened, then stopped. Water ticked from the underpass lip. Somewhere distant, a siren rose and faded, meaningless and huge. The dog rested his chin on the bundle, feeling the flutter of a heartbeat through fabric, and let the city keep its noise. He had carved a hollow from it. He had made a space where one tiny life could breathe. He would fill that space with his own body, as many times as it took. The baby slept on, anchored by the rough, steadfast warmth. The German shepherd, ribs and resolve, watched the edges of their little world for any flicker of threat, any shine of help, measuring both with the same steady gaze. Safety wasn't a place, it was an act, repeated, imperfect, relentless. He would pursue it until he had no breath left to count. The city had shifted from rain to mist, the kind that clung to skin and blurred the distance. In the underpass, the baby stirred, his tiny mouth searching the air as though even in dreams he was reaching for something warm. The German shepherd, who had kept vigil through the endless night, lifted his head, ears twitching at a sound beyond the hum of tires. A human voice, closer this time, not angry, not mocking. It was the woman again. She had promised she would return, and now she stood at the mouth of the underpass, her coat pulled tight against the damp, her hands gripping a bag that sagged heavy with food. She crouched low, her eyes catching on the bundle and then on the dog curled protectively around it. The shepherd rose, every muscle quivering between fight and trust. His growl was low, uncertain, a sound threaded with warning and plea. "I know," the woman whispered, as though she understood the language in his tension. "I won't hurt him. I brought some." She set the bag down and pulled out a bottle, a small blanket, and a plastic container of soft food. The smell of chicken drifted into the underpass, warm and rich. The dog's nose twitched, hunger roaring up inside him like a storm, but he did not move forward. His body blocked the baby, his eyes fixed on her every movement. The woman held the bottle up, showing the milk within, and then slowly tipped a little onto her wrist before offering it forward. "For him," she said. "For the baby." The German shepherd hesitated, torn between need and fear, but the baby's cry rose suddenly, thin, pained, desperate. It cut through the dog like a blade. He stepped aside, only barely, his body still a wall but no longer unyielding. The woman edged closer, her knees pressing to the wet concrete. With careful hands, she lifted the baby, murmuring softly, rocking him against her chest. She pressed the bottle to his lips, and instantly the child latched, drinking greedily. Relief softened his tiny body, his cries dwindling into soft gulps and sighs. The dog watched, heart hammering, ready to strike if the woman made a single move that threatened. But she did. She only cradled the baby as though he were her own, tears glistening in her eyes as she whispered, "Oh, little one, oh, thank God." When the baby had drunk his fill and drifted into sleep, she wrapped him in the new blanket, dry and warm. She set him back gently in the alcove, and then reached into the bag again, pulling out a paper plate of chicken. She slid it forward on the ground, never breaking eye contact with the dog. "You need this too," she said softly. "I can see it in your bones." The shepherd hesitated only a moment before hunger won. He stepped forward, head low, and tore into the food with shaking jaws. Every bite filled him with warmth, strength seeping back into his body. He ate quickly but not without glancing up, again and again to ensure the baby remained safe. The woman stayed still, her presence quiet, her breathing calm. She seemed to understand that trust could not be forced, only offered. When the food was gone and the dog had licked the plate clean, he stepped back and pressed his nose against the baby's cheek, checking, reassuring himself that the child was still there. The infant stirred, sighed, and reached blindly with a small hand that brushed the dog's. The shepherd's tail gave a faint wag. For the first time since the station, there was relief. The woman exhaled slowly, as though she too had been holding her breath for hours. "You're not just a stray," she murmured. "You're his protector, his lifeline." The words seemed to echo in the underpass, heavy with truth. The German shepherd lowered himself beside the baby once more, his body curving protectively around the small form. The woman rose, glancing toward the street, torn between calling for help and respecting the silent vow she had witnessed. "I'll come back," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I promise, I won't leave you like everyone else did." She stepped away, her figure fading into the mist. The dog watched her go, the taste of chicken still warm in his mouth, the baby's breathing steady against his side. For a brief, fragile moment, the storm of survival had eased. They were still alone, still vulnerable, but they were no longer forgotten. In that underpass, with the echoes of danger still lurking in the city's corners, they had found the first flicker of rescue, relief that didn't erase the struggle, but reminded them both why they had to keep going. The night would come again, heavy and uncertain, but for now, they had food, warmth, and each other. And that was enough to make tomorrow worth facing. Morning unfolded like a careful hand, prying open the gray city to reveal something gentler beneath. The underpass breathed its thin warmth, a constant hush that softened the edges of the cold. The baby woke first, a flutter of eyelids, a puckering of lips, a small sound that wasn't yet a cry. The German shepherd lifted his head before the sound even formed, his body tuning to the infant as though the baby's breath were a second heartbeat, stitched into his own. He nudged the blanket into a tighter cocoon. The baby's eyes found him, those blue-gray orbs brighter now, and a slow, uncoordinated smile wobbled into place, an imitation of joy he'd learned from the dog's nearness. The shepherd answered with a tail thump that made no sound, just a dull vibration through concrete. He lowered his nose until it brushed the baby's brow. The tiny hand rose, slow and sure, and rested on the bridge of his muzzle. They stayed that way, animal and child, two steadying points, until footsteps returned at the mouth of the underpass. The woman, she came as she had promised, less a stranger now than a shape their small world had learned to expect. The bag over her shoulder sat heavier, and her movements had the purposeful economy of someone who'd made decisions in the hours since she left. She stopped just inside the shadow and crouched, voice a quiet thread. "Good morning," she said, as if sharing a kitchen. "I brought fresh bottles, and blankets, and some things for you." His body formed the same calm, solid wall it had yesterday. "No, but maybe. Not yet. But stay." The woman respected the line. She set her bag down and one by one slid items forward. A thermos brimming with warm water, clean cloths, a new bottle, a small jar of pureed carrots, a plastic spoon, a pack of baby wipes with a cartoon duck that made the baby's eyes linger. "For you," she said again, softer, and placed a shallow bowl with broth and rice, a few inches closer than the rest. Hunger rose in the dog like a tide, but he didn't move until the baby had taken the bottle, until he'd watched the child's mouth settle on the silicone nipple with a relieved little sigh that untied a knot in his own chest. Then he lowered to the bowl. The broth was warm and fragrant. The rice softened to a paste that sat heavy in a good way, after days of scraps. He ate with restraint, learned last night. 2 bites, a glance back. 3 bites, a soft nudge to the blanket. The woman watched without crowding. Once she reached up and swiped at her cheek, then laughed quietly at herself. "I'm Mara," she said, as if offering a hand. "I work at the deli across the street. That's not my whole story. But it's enough for names, are for the ones who stay, not the ones who pass through." The city might have said if cities spoke, but the dog didn't know cities. He knew patterns. Mara returned. Mara fed. Mara looked at the baby the way his first person had once looked at him, like sunlight through a door. "Who are you?" Mara asked the dog and answered herself a beat later. "Guardian, I guess. We'll stick with that." She didn't try to touch him. She spoke to the baby instead, a stream of gentle nonsense that smoothed the edges of each moment. "Good morning, small one. Look at those fists. You've got a lot to say, huh?" The baby stared in fascination at the motion of her lips, and then turned to the shepherd as if to check. "Is this okay?" The dog's ears tipped forward, his mouth softened and the tension that had coiled in his hindquarters unspooled by a single loop. They made a ritual of it over the next days, the hours stitched by bottles and bowls, the thermos trading places with an empty one, the plastic spoon tapping a rhythm against the jar's lip. Mara's visits stretched a little longer each time. She asked permission with distance. A foot closer if his tail stayed easy, a slower, lower movement if his shoulders tightened. The dog answered with his body reading hers in return. If she shifted too quickly, he hummed and she paused. If she lingered too long, he resettled himself between her and the baby. Not a rebuke, just a reminder. Mara respected every reminder. "You've got a system," she murmured to him one afternoon as traffic droned like the sea above them. "We'll work inside." Inside the system, small mercies multiplied. She brought a soft hat that kept the baby's head from beating with damp. She brought ointment for the chapped corners of his mouth, and the dog learned to sniff it and look away, the way one averts their eyes from a private kindness. She brought a chew, nothing fancy, just a rope knot from the pet aisle, and set it near the dog's paws without remark. He ignored it for hours as if it were a test. When he finally rested his chin across it at dusk, Mara pretended not to notice, which made it safe to keep. Between these rituals, the baby lengthened. His cries softened at the edges. Sleep came in longer runs, deep and slack, broken by moments when he startled himself with a laugh and reached flapping for the dog's ear. The shepherd learned that if he angled his head just so the tiny fingers could find fur without grabbing skin, he learned the weight of that small hand in all its states. Curious, cranky, falling asleep, slack. Each new lesson nested in the old. Protect, warmth. Check the breath. Check again. Mara measured the dog with her eyes and then with her words. "You're young but not a puppy. Maybe 2, 3, you used to have a home. You know people, you know from the way you don't snarl unless you have to." She squinted. "Your coat will shine again, it will. We'll get there." The words smudged a line that had been hard. The dog didn't grasp grammar, but he registered the weight of that plural in the same place he held the baby's scent. Danger didn't vanish. It reconfigured. Twice, a pair of men used the underpass to cut out of the rain. eyes skimming the alcove and then snagging on the odd picture of it. Woman, dog, baby. The shepherd rose in silk-smooth increments, until he filled their view, ears high, head level, the quiet like a lifted spear. The men rerouted, their laughter brittle, and Mara smiled without showing teeth. Good, she said under her breath to the dog. That's right. Another time. A patrol car idled at the curb above. Voices crackled. Footsteps pounded down. The dog read the change in Mara before he mapped it to the men's uniforms. The way her hand hovered, briefly over her own chest. How she let it fall wide of the baby rather than toward him. A careful choreography of non-threat. She spoke first. Level. Precise. Found him here, she said. Meaning the child. Or maybe meaning both. I've been bringing food. He needs a doctor. He's stable now. The officers took one cautious step too close, and the dog rose fully. Posture neither cower nor charge. Just the kind of certainty that makes the next step reconsider itself. One officer looked at the baby, and swallowed. The other, older, lowered his voice. Easy, he said to himself as much as to the animal. Nobody's taking anybody. Not like that. He crouched, sideways, gaze on the pavement where water made a dark new map. We can call child services, or there's a nurse 2 blocks over who volunteers with a clinic. Off the book. We could start there. Okay? Mara's eyes flicked to the dog. The dog barely moved, but the shift in his breath slower, releasing a hinge, was an answer buried inside a body. The clinic first, she said, a thread of relief stitched through the word. The older officer nodded, and rose with the patient effort of knees that had catalogued too many foot chases. We'll get you a ride, he said, and added to the dog, serious like a promise, not like a joke. You too, if you're coming. The dog pressed against the blanket. He didn't know words like clinic or services. He knew the smell of the baby's fear, which didn't quicken. He knew the pattern of Mara's voice when she believed they were choosing the least dangerous path. In the end, they didn't ride. The officer phoned ahead and walked them. A slow procession through the damp morning. Mara with the baby tucked against her chest. The shepherd at her knee, shoulder brushing her leg like a braced beam. The younger cop trailing with the wary courtesy of someone escorting a saint and a landmine. People paused and parted as they passed, their faces arranging around the picture into surprised tenderness, the habitual pain of seeing and moving on. The clinic lived in a storefront that had known other lives. A barber shop, a tailor. The bell above the door announced them in a jangle. Inside, the air held tea and bleach. A woman with tired eyes and quick hands met them halfway. Let me see him, she said, and nobody had to explain which him. Mara placed the baby on a warmed towel, and the dog positioned himself so close that the nurse reached out, palm up. He sniffed it, sidelong, then lifted his gaze to her face as if reading intention. She let her hand drop and worked around him, narrating for everyone's sake. Dehydrated, but better than yesterday, she said, making an assumption that made Mara's eyes shine. Chapped lips, no sunken fontanelle. That's good. No rash, breathing easy. That's very good. He's hungry. That much is clear. How long has he been with you? Mara opened her mouth and closed it. The dog's ear flicked. The baby burped a surprised bubble. The nurse glanced at the shepherd. Recalibrated. Okay, she said. Different question, have you named him? They hadn't. The baby existed beyond names in the dog's world. An organism whose every signal was a directive. Eat, sleep, warmth, be happy. The idea of a label felt almost like an indulgence and also like a tether. Mara studied the infant's face, then the dog's, then the spot of light on the clinic wall. Jonah, she said finally. He looks like a Jonah. The nurse nodded, not because the word was perfect, but because it would do the work names do. Anchor a person to being chosen. And you? She asked, looking at the dog again. Mara didn't hesitate this time. Rook, she said. You move like a shield on a board. Rook. The consonant sat sure on the tongue. It felt like granite, like standing. The dog did not understand chess, but he understood Mara's smile. He flicked his eyes toward Jonah, the baby, the child, the boy with a name, and then back to the nurse. The nurse translated the exchange with a practiced fluency in animals and people. He stays, she decided. Rule 1. You don't come between Rook and Jonah. Rule 2.
You don't restrain Rook if he warns. You invite. You don't grab. She looked to the officers, who had lingered by the door like men who'd stepped into a church. If anyone asks, we didn't see anything we weren't supposed to. The exam was slow and thorough. Jonah endured the stethoscope with a startled frown, and then a giggle when Rook nuzzled his ear at the cold. A tiny cuff measured his pulse and winsome hiccups. The nurse checked joints and reflexes, the miniature flex and release of knees and ankles. Rook tracked every movement, leaning in when Jonah's breath hitched, exhaling when it steadied. Mara rubbed the rope toy between her fingers until it creaked. Good signs, the nurse said finally. We'll need to think about longer-term care, but for today, continue what you're doing. Hydration, warmth, small, frequent feeds, and her hand hesitated, then found a path. Rook needs dewormer, flea treatment, and a proper meal that isn't just generosity in a bowl. I have samples. He'll turn those bones into strength faster than you think. Back at the underpass, the world felt altered, not safer. City symphonies don't abandon their minor keys, but less indifferent. Rook settled into the alcove with Jonah and watched him sleep off the clinic's exertion. Mara brewed tea from a thermos and dipped a biscuit in it, with the air of someone celebrating with the only luxury available. You did good, she told them both. And then to the dog alone, Rook, it fits you. Names thickened the thread between them. In the days that followed, Rook carried them like twin obligations, in his posture when strangers appeared, in his patience, when Jonah tried to taste his ear, in the way he learned to place his body to make a windbreak that benefited both baby and woman. Mara adjusted her life to fit the underpass's rhythm. A late shift traded, a neighbor asked to cover for an hour, a backpack repurposed into a mobile pantry. She never told her whole story, but pieces fell like breadcrumbs. A sister upstate, a mother who called too early and too often, a grief she nursed with work and long walks that now had a destination. Rook he relearned sit, not as a trick but as a language. Mara would open her hand, palm up, he would lower, Jonah would clap his fists against his blanket, with the zeal of a king commissioning a statue. He learned wait at curbs and come when Mara's whistle rose 2 notes through her teeth. He accepted a collar only after Mara let it sit near the blanket for a day, then draped it over her own wrist, then looped it around a thermos. When she finally fastened it around his neck, she did it with the slowness of tying a friendship bracelet. He didn't shake it off. Sometimes Mara would set Jonah on a folded blanket on the dry patch of sidewalk just beyond the alcove, and roll a soft ball toward him. It would stop halfway. Rook would nudge it the rest of the distance with his nose, reading the game's logic and rewriting it for 4 limbs and no language. Jonah would squeal. Mara would press her fist to her mouth to hold in laughter that might carry. With strength came trouble of a subtle kind. Jonah had a fever one night that trembled under his skin like a moth. The underpass's breath felt too thin to cool. Rook lay with his belly pressed to the concrete to wick his own heat away, and then tucked himself along Jonah's side, a warm boundary carefully applied, adjusting when the baby's skin grew clammy, lifting his head to let air move when the breath turned raspy. Mara counted minutes with her phone's screen lighting her face, and pressed damp cloth to Jonah's neck, swapping it, the moment it warmed. They whispered his name like a litany. Jonah, Jonah, stay. By dawn the fever broke, a fragile truce the color of first love. Mara cried then without sound. Rook licked the salt from her wrist, as if he could return it to where it belonged. Growth wasn't a straight line. It was a braid setback woven into game. But each day left its marker, a fuller belly, an easier breath, a gaze that tracked a bird's zigzag instead of drifting past it. Jonah discovered his own hands, and the way Rook's fur made them vanish and reappear. He discovered that if he stared very hard at Mara's face, she would stick out her tongue, and this was worth all the milk in the world. People began to know them. The boy with the school bag, who had started this with a sandwich, learned to leave his offerings at the same brick seam each morning. A bus driver tossed them end-of-day pretzels in a little paper bag, as though feeding a blessed luck he wasn't sure he believed in. The deli owner pretended not to notice the extra sandwich missing from inventory, and asked Mara nothing he wasn't prepared to be lied to about. One evening, When the sky finally remembered how to be blue, Mara sat with her back against the pillar, Jonah asleep, with a milk coma softening his lips, and Rook stretched long with his head on her boot. "You can't stay here forever," she said to the not-quite silence. "I know it, you know it." Rook opened one eye, and met hers, and in that bleary canine gaze was the kind of comprehension that doesn't require words. "Yes, but not yet. Not until the shape of safety is something Jonah can recognize without looking for you. Without looking for me." Mara nodded, as if he'd spoken. "We'll find a way," she said. "A place. I can talk to Miss Keating at the clinic. There's a program sometimes. Short-term foster they call it. With mothers and babies. They don't know what to do with dogs. But maybe for you, they make a new rule." Rook didn't know programs. He knew rules. He liked the ones that ended with Jonah reaching toward him, with Mara's voice wrapped in warmth. He slept then, the kind of sleep that animals trust to those who have earned it. Not a collapse, but a surrender. Healing had not made them invincible. It had made them visible to each other, to the city, to the storms that gather after a stretch of sun. It had carved a space inside Rook where something new could live, alongside the vigilance, not merely the grinding will to survive, but the fragile, stubborn belief that survival might someday be replaced by living. Growth's proof was everywhere, if you knew how to count it, in the weight of Jonah's body when Mara lifted him, in the shine that returned, hair by hair, to Rook's coat, in the way Mara's shoulders lowered a millimeter when a siren wailed, and Rook didn't rise to fight it. These things didn't sing, they didn't make headlines, but they were the music against which the future would set its beat. And somewhere, past the low rumble of buses and the vowels of street vendors calling wares, another sound coiled at the edges of the underpass, the slow, deliberate footfall of the kind of trouble that watches before it strikes. Rook heard it once and filed. He lifted his head, listened, let it go. Not yet, he thought, in whatever way dogs think. Today is for strength. He curled back around Jonah and counted the breaths he now knew by heart, a prayer that didn't require any god but the one that lives in the act of keeping. Outside, the city turned its face toward evening, and inside the alcove, 3 lives gathered their small accumulating light. The underpass had grown familiar, almost safe. With Mara's visits and the clinic's quiet care, Jonah was stronger now, his cheeks less hollow, his laugh more frequent. Rook's coat had begun to gloss again, ribs less sharp beneath his skin. The rhythm of bottles and broth, of soft blankets and watchful eyes, had lulled them into something that almost resembled peace. But peace, Rook knew, was brittle. He felt it in the city's hum, in the way certain footsteps didn't match their echoes, in how some voices carried sharpness instead of weariness. The scent of danger was always nearby, hiding in the folds of routine. It was twilight when the first crack appeared. Mara had gone to fetch supplies, promising to return before dark. Rook lay curled around Jonah, who slept soundly, his small hand tangled in the shepherd's fur. Outside, the streets sang their ordinary chorus. Horns, laughter, the hiss of a bus. But beneath it ran something else, a rhythm out of place. Footsteps, slow, measured, too deliberate. Rook stiffened, ears pricking forward, his nose twitched. Alcohol, sweat, the sharp tang of metal, a smell he remembered from the station. The man, the same stagger in the steps, the same muttering under breath. A shadow stretched at the mouth of the underpass, long and crooked. The dog's growl began deep in his chest, a vibration that made the baby stir. Jonah whimpered softly, sensing the storm through sleep. Rook bent his head, nuzzling him once before rising to his feet, placing his body between the child and the dark. "Well, well," the man's voice slurred, but his eyes glittered with malice. "Still here, you and that brat." His hand flashed, and in it gleamed the same knife, small but sharp, a predator's promise. Fear rippled through Rook, not for himself but for the fragile life behind him. His heart hammered, but his stance was steady, his body braced like stone. He barked once, sharp, commanding, a warning that cracked the air like thunder. Jonah woke then, crying, his tiny voice piercing the underpass. The sound ignited something primal in the shepherd. His teeth bared, hackles raised. He stepped forward, the growl rising into a roar. The man laughed, though it quavered. Brave mutt. Let's see how long that lasts. He stepped closer. Rook lunged, the movement explosive. Every muscle coiled into a single strike. The man staggered back, the knife slipping from his grip and clattering against the concrete. His eyes widened, fear replacing bravado as the shepherd's teeth snapped inches from his arm. For a long second, the man froze, staring into eyes that promised death if he moved closer. Then he cursed, spat, and stumbled back into the night, his shadow retreating down the street. The knife remained, glinting on the ground. Rook didn't chase. He stood still, chest heaving, until the man's footsteps faded into nothing. Only then did he turn back, pressing his body close to Jonah, licking his tear-streaked face, until the cries softened. The knife lay between them and the world outside, a silent reminder. Danger was not gone. It never would be. When Mara returned, her arms laden with supplies, she stopped dead at the sight. Rook standing guard, Jonah cradled in blankets, and the knife shining cold at the shepherd's paw. Her face drained of color. What happened? She whispered, though she already knew. Rook met her gaze, steady and unflinching. His eyes told the story. Mara knelt, her hands trembling as she pushed the knife away. She touched Jonah's cheek, then pressed her forehead briefly to Rook. You saved him, she said, her voice breaking. You always save him. But fear lingered like smoke. That man would return, or others like him. The city did not forgive weakness. And now, more than ever, their bond would be tested. As night deepened, Jonah slept once more, his breaths even and soft. Mara sat close, staring at the dark beyond the underpass, her arm around the baby, her other hand resting lightly on Rook's back. Echoes of fear still haunted them, but so did the unshakable truth. Together, they were stronger than fear itself, and tomorrow they would have to be stronger still. The knife left a taste in the underpass, metal and old. Mara had wrapped it in 2 grocery bags and slid it deep into a trash can, 3 blocks away, but Rook still checked the alcove's mouth every few breaths as if the thing could cut its way back through air. Jonah slept with the pliant heaviness of exhaustion, his little fists open, palms moon pale in the half-light. The city above turned itself over into night, tail lights redrawing the ceiling, footsteps thinning, the river's damp breath arriving in long, cool exhales. Peace was not a blanket anymore. It was a thread. Rook held it in his teeth and did not tug. Tomorrow we move, Mara whispered, more to steady herself than to inform him. Her voice shook, then caught, then steadied. Not far. Keating at the clinic knows a church with a basement. They open when it gets too cold. They don't take dogs usually. She looked at him, and her mouth softened. We'll see if usually bends. Rook tipped his head, parsing tone. He understood not far. He understood. Move by the way. Mara's eyes tracked the world beyond the alcove, measuring lines of approach and escape. Move would mean corridors that changed, threats recalculated, walls tested with his shoulder before the baby's breath could reach them. He catalogued the new word church and filed it next to clinic. Places, with white light, and certain smells like lemon and mittened hands. Basements meant stairs. Stairs meant carrying or dragging. He remembered the ramp at the station, and felt the old burn in his chest. Jonah stirred and coughed, the small sound of a throat learning how to clear itself. Rook slid closer until the baby's bare toes pressed into warm fur. The cough subsided. Mara exhaled with it and rubbed at her face as if fear could be scrubbed off like city dust. The night hung. It was the kind of darkness that doesn't quite settle, too many currents moving through it, too many circuits sparking across distant rooftops. When it finally stilled, it did so with a suspicion of itself. Rook drifted and returned, a yo-yo sleep on a very short string. In one slip of quiet, a pigeon exploded into flight under the bridge. In another, a motorcycle stitched a zipper of noise along the river road. In a third, a shadow separated from other shadows at the underpass mouth and did not move on. Rook was upright before the shape made sound. The posture was reflex. Paws set, shoulders slightly forward, head level, ears angling to isolate the grind of a boot sole on grit. Not the knife man, taller, a steadier breathing. The scent carried bottle shop air but not the sourness of old fear. Rook let a low thread of sound vibrate his The shadow paused. Whoa there. A voice came, low, careful, the human equivalent of a turned palm. Not here to start something. I've seen you. The figure stepped just close enough for the lamplight to sketch his outline. A man in his 50s maybe, with a cap pulled down and a jacket, shiny at the elbows. He held a paper sack topped with a loaf end, and the crown of an apple. He placed it on the cement and slid it forward with a
For the baby, he said. And then after a beat, and for you, soldier. Rook recognized neither the word soldier nor the shape of the man's life. But he understood offerings. He stayed where he was. His growl softened to a hum. Mara woke at the sound, and came up on one elbow, eyes taking in the man, the bag, Rook's tension. Her hand went to Jonah before it went to fear. She shifted, putting herself where Rook had been, dog and woman forming a layered wall. Who are ye? She asked. Not the way a cop asks, but the way someone chooses whether to let a stranger nearer a fire. Name's Saul, the man said. He kept his distance, voice finding a groove of self-mockery that asked for nothing in return. I sleep 2 arches down most nights. Been watching. You got a situation. His gaze flicked toward where the knife had been without knowing it had been there. It's loud lately. After the bars let out, Mara studied him, then nodded once. It is. Used to be loud different, Saul said. Used to be fists and fights, and then everyone slept. Now it's screens and boys who don't feel what they do. They record you instead of help you. He clucked his tongue, a little rhythm that made Rook's ears twitch. Careful about the boy with the school bag. He's kind, but he'll make you a story if you don't watch it. Stories travel. Some of them come with teeth. Mara's face tightened with a realization she disliked but didn't dismiss. Rook felt her attention turn like a weather vane. The boy's sandwich had been a piece of grace. Grace made patterns. Patterns made notice. He understood notice. The first person who had given him a name had taught him heal and come and stay with notice. The next set of hands had taught him fear with it. I'll talk to him, Mara said. Gently, Saul shifted his weight, towing the bag closer. I ain't a hero, he added. Don't mistake me. I look out 'cause nobody looked out when I needed it. That ain't nobility, it's math. He tugged his cap down, and almost shrugged. If the knife man comes back, make no. I do okay with noisy. He tipped an imaginary brim to Rook. You got a set of eyes on you like a sergeant. Keep him. He left then, becoming negative space again. The apple's clean scent curled into the alcove, a crisp counterpoint to the underpass's damp. Mara retrieved the bag and found formula, 2 sealed bottles, a small pack of wipes, and a note written in someone else's tidy hand. For the infant, no questions. It smelled faintly of lavender soap and old paper. Mara's face did a complicated thing, hope mixing with the sadness. Hope requires you to admit you need. She folded the note and slid it into her pocket, as if it might be good to have proof later that kindness had exact dates and shapes. By morning they had a plan that wasn't simply keep breathing. Mara left before dawn to speak to the church. Rook watched her go down the sidewalk, countable in the rhythm of her steps, and counted until 8 buses had hissed and gone. This was their new measurement of distance. How many public machines exhaled between them? Jonah woke into a fidgety mood that often presaged a growth spurt or a storm. He blinked at the world and scolded it with small sounds, until Rook nudged his belly just enough to trigger a laugh. A man in a reflective vest paused at the rail and whistled, not a summoning sound but an appreciation. There he is, he said softly to no one, and moved on. The boy with the school bag came, saw Rook looking straight at him, and stopped halfway through the pocket reach he'd trained his body to. He shrugged at himself and smiled sheepishly. Okay, he said, palms out. Okay. He set the sandwich at the brick seam and kept walking. He didn't take his phone out. Mara returned mid-morning, hair damp with mist, cheeks mottled from talking to bureaucracy that didn't have a name for a family like theirs. They'll let us in tonight, she said, crouching, smiling, not letting the exhaustion in her knees show up in her voice. Not in the main room, but in the hallway by the boiler, quiet and warm and out of the wind. The tears that had been waiting all morning spilled sideways from relief. They said yes, she laughed, half incredulity, half release. They said yes because Keating said, she would vouch for you, Rook. She said the words as if you were any other client. He's a guardian, she told them. He's part of the baby's care. Rook's tail beat once, heavy and deliberate. Guardian was a collar he could wear without bristle. They prepared quietly, the way people do who know that moving draws attention. Mara repacked the bag into two, the baby's needs and the not baby's needs. She tucked the rope toy into the second, and then, reconsidering, moved it to the You're both allowed comforts, she said, more stern than sentimental. Afternoon thinned to evening, the way warm tea thins to water. The underpass filled with a different tribe as light drained. Men and women who owned nothing that couldn't be carried fast, who knew the names of the officers who looked first and asked second. Saul nodded when he saw them ready. He pointed with his chin toward the far end. Take fourth, he advised. Fewer cameras. The church likes its thresholds quiet. They took fourth. Rook paced the inside, not crowding Mara, not outrunning her, keeping Jonah's head a constant in his peripheral vision. They passed a storefront where their reflections arrayed themselves, the woman's shoulders squared too sharp against the night, the dog's outline like a sigil, the bundle with the particular heft of beloved. No one else saw it, but Mara did, and for a step her stride faltered with the unfamiliarity of seeing yourself as a story instead of a person. 2 blocks from the church, the temperature seemed to drop, not in degrees, the kind of drop that happens in the gut, a barometer of something wicked turning its eye. Rick's hackles prickled before his brain had images. Then the images came. A man half leaning in a doorway. A second shape across the street pretending to smoke without inhaling. A car idling just a little too long, not coordinated enough to be police, not chaotic enough to be random. Watchers, Mara felt it too. Her breath shortened, sharpened, the way prey learns to take in less air so the brush parts less. She adjusted Jonah up and tighter, which made Rook adjust his arc closer, which made the watchers shift their weight and recast their eyes to unrelated subjects. Keep walking, Mara said without looking at him. Rook did, though a deep, stupid part of him wanted to turn, to make his face big, to teach the night the geometry of his teeth. Jonah made a small, curious chirp, and then, catching the adult's muscles reading danger, quieted into that eerie compliance babies find when rooms ask them to be secret. At the corner a figure peeled away from the doorway and matched their pace half a lane over. Rook moved between, not enough to be a block, enough to be a statement. The man, mid-30s, hood up, looked at the dog, and then over him at Mara. His eyes were bright and hollow as bottle glass. Hey, he said with the oily cordiality of someone who likes to see others. That your dog? That your kid? You on the news? Could be. People would click. Mara didn't break stride. We don't want trouble, she said, simple as a weather report. Trouble's what clicks, he offered back. But even his mockery had conditionals now. Rick's presence rewrote confidence into caution. The man fell back a half step, then 2. When the light changed, he ghosted the other way as if bored. They reached the church doors in the flinch of a second that felt endless. Wood, thick and scarred. Stained glass gone dark from outside, but beating with color within. A brass plaque with raised letters made of charity. St. Brigid's. Mara knocked the quiet knock. Keating had taught her to pause. One, and from inside a latch slid, and a woman's face appeared, framed in the sliver like a saint in a painting. Gray hair tied back, eyes that had borne their own small storms. You're our hallway family, she said, a conclusion more than a welcome. Come fast, nights like this. The neighborhood grows eyes. They went fast. The door thudded behind them with the uncomfortable sound of safety, gained by closing others out. The smell inside was old wood and bleach and soups. A narrow corridor ran off the narthex like a vein. At the end of it, a boiler rumbled softly, giving off the kind of heat that makes people forgive a room for being windowless. Sister Agnes, names attached themselves quickly to people who move with purpose, led them to a square of floor already claimed by 2 mats, a folded cot, and a basket with odds and ends, a pack of socks, a small stuffed bear with one eye sewn anew, a stack of plain white towels. No animals, she said, reading the posted rule as if from scripture, and then folded the paper tape over on itself, except those whose presence disturbs less than their absence. He has a collar, he has a calm, that counts. Rook stood very still, reading doorways, air currents, the pattern of passing feet. The hallway filled with small domestic noises amplified by tile, the slip of a shoe sole, the whisper of blankets being shaken out, the chink of spoon against bowl. Somewhere beyond, the sanctuary glowed low. A murmur of late prayer wove itself through the boiler's heartbeat. We'll keep you until morning, Sister Agnes said. We'll keep you longer if the city asks the wrong question. She placed a hand on Mara's shoulder, not holding, just registering a temperature. Your baby is the right size for our donated onesies. Your dog is the right size for our largest kindness. We'll see if it fits. Mara laughed, surprised by the sound shaped like a sigh. Thank you, she said. And then again, as if saying it twice could cover the part that words can't reach. They bedded down on the mats, Jonah between Rook and Mara, the cot empty because the proximity itself was the larger wreck. Rook lay with his flank touching the baby and his nose aimed at the door. Sister Agnes dimmed the hallway light. The building exhaled. For a moment, one glittering, fragile beat. Mara let her muscles admit fatigue and not disdain it. The church's walls held back a lot. They could not hold back everything. Somewhere outside, a car idled, moved, idled again. Steps came, then went, then came back. This was the bad rhythm. The stalker's shuffle. Rook's ear pivoted. Sister Agnes looked up from a ledger she'd been pretending to read, and met his gaze over distance with a tiny nod. I hear it too. Shadows thickened under the crack of the door, then drifted away like smoke. The boiler hiccuped and returned to stay. Jonah sighed, rolled, found the dog with his foot. Rook closed his eyes and opened them on a schedule he didn't know he'd written. Midnight pulled its blanket tighter. Somewhere in the church a pipe clanged. Old buildings keep their own percussion. Rook sat up so slowly that the motion made no sound. He was looking at the door because he had smelled something before he heard it. The acid wire smell of fear that belongs to men who intend to pretend they are not afraid by forcing others to be. The latch moved, once, twice. Sister Agnes was on her feet already, the way some people move faster than they are supposed to at their age when the past wakes in their bodies. Mara slid her arm across Jonah automatically. Miniature shield. Rook stood and made himself into a wall with eyes. The knock came then. The wrong pattern. Not two. Pause. One. 4 impatient taps. A beat of silence. And the squeak of a sneaker pivoting on tile. Police, a voice said. But it carried the flat note of a man who believes names are keys that open doors. Sister Agnes did not move to open. We're closed, she said, firm and almost kind. Come back at 8. If you need warmth, there's a shelter on 13th. Got a report, the voice said, losing patience. Woman with an infant. Dog. Possible endangerment. You harboring. Rook pressed weight into his front paws until his claws found the seams between tiles, and anchored there. Mara didn't breathe. Jonah slept because at some point, sleep truly is a gift. Sister Agnes walked to the door and placed her palm against it. Not to push. Simply to be connected. We're harboring life, she said. As is our custom. If you have a warrant, we'll read it together. Her gaze ticked to Rook, then to Mara. Otherwise, we'll pray you find new concerns. From the other side, a huff, a laugh. Lady, you can't. And then another voice. A woman's, sharp, controlled, cut in over him, too far away to be at the door but close enough to pull the strings. Sergeant Vance, she said. Stand down. St. Bridget's is not your call tonight. Silent. The sneaker squeaked again. Smaller this time. A retreat. Someone shook the latch out of habit, and then, remembering themselves, let it be. Footsteps receded to the sound of rain that wasn't there. Sister Agnes exhaled with the boiler. She did not smile. She looked like someone who had had to stand between men and need too many times. Shadows, she said, barely audible. They think doors are ideas. She turned the bolt. Not much of a defense, if someone wanted it, but enough of a symbol to give the wall of bodies behind it one more layer. Mara swallowed air like it was broth. Rook lay down again without uncoiling. He watched Jonah breathe through the edge of his eye. The darkness wanted to be absolute. Inside the corridor, a small lamp made a warm tear in it. Shadows had lengthened and tested every seam of their world. But here, in a hallway hardly bigger than a city bus, and with a saint's portrait looking down with the sternness of people who believed in choices more difficult than this one, they had found the border of a different kind of night. Not safe, but held. Rook rested his chin on his paw. The underpass had taught him to count buses. The church taught him to count heartbeats. The buildings, the babies, his own, layered into a new clock he could set watch by. Outside, the watchers regrouped into other alleys. Inside, the dog and the woman stalked their quiet like a pantry. The baby slept and dreamt of warmth shaped like an animal that never moved away. Shadows would return. The city would ask for a toll. Trouble, having sniffed them out, would not lose the scent.
but the hallway poured a line of light under the door and kept it there, thin and stubborn till dawn. And Rook, guardian, Rook, soldier by someone else's naming, kept his eyes on the seam where that light stopped, waiting, measuring, ready to stand again the second it trembled. The hallway had become their haven, but haven was a fragile word. Its letters cracked at the edges, thin as glass, and Rook could hear the pressure outside it, voices prowling, rumors chasing, the city's appetite sniffing them out like smoke through cracks. Inside, though, the boiler hummed. Jonah slept with his cheek pressed to Mara's chest, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing, lulling him deeper. Rook lay against the cool tile, half his body stretched long, half coiled so that with the smallest motion he could stand. His eyes tracked the door, the seams in the wall, the places where light shifted. Mara whispered once, to herself as much as to him, "I don't know how much longer we can live like this." The words weren't despairing, not. They carried weight, but also a quiet stubbornness, like someone admitting the storm but refusing to lie down in it. Rook shifted closer, pressing his chin against Jonah's foot where it dangled from the blanket. The baby twitched and sighed, the contact enough to tether him back into sleep. Mara saw, and a ghost of a smile crossed her tired face. "You're always watching," she said, "even when I can't anymore." Footsteps padded soft, trying not to echo. Rook was on his feet in a breath, silent but bristling, head lowered, tail straight. He stepped forward just enough to mark territory. It was a boy, maybe 14, clutching a backpack too big for him. His face was pale, eyes darting. He froze when he saw the shepherd blocking the hall, his thin chest rising and falling too quickly. The boy swallowed. "I just needed a blanket, please." Mara sat up, her voice calm but firm. "It's all right, Rook." The dog didn't move, but his growl quieted. Mara reached behind, grabbed one of their spare blankets, and slid it across the floor. The boy scooped it up, his eyes never leaving the shepherd's. "Thanks," he whispered, and scurried off. Rook stayed standing until the sound of the boy's door latch clicked. Then he returned, curling back around the baby, though his ears stayed cocked toward the hall. Mara stroked Jonah's hair, her whisper threading into the quiet. "Guardian, that's what you are, not just for him, for all of us." Sister Agnes set bowls of oatmeal along the corridor. Jonah giggled when Mara dipped her finger in and touched it to his lips. He smacked, surprised by the new texture, and kicked with joy. Rook watched, his tail thudding softly at the sight, but the piece fractured quickly. A shadow lingered too long at the window near the sanctuary, a face pressed against the glass before vanishing. When Mara looked up, Saul appeared later, whispering through the side door. "People are asking, not kind people. They say there's a dog guarding a baby like it's treasure. They're curious. Curious gets dangerous." Mara's stomach twisted. She looked down at Jonah, then at Rook. "We can't stay still," she murmured. "The world won't let us." Rook pressed against her leg, eyes steady, as if to remind her. "Then we move together." That night, Mara barely slept. She sat against the wall, Jonah dozing across her lap, while Rook paced the hall in measured steps. Each time he passed the door, he paused, listened. The church was quiet, but the city outside was restless. Sirens, climbing, laughter too sharp, the sound of something breaking. At one point, Mara let her head fall against the wall, whispering, a prayer she didn't know she still remembered. Rook stopped his pacing and pressed against her side. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the weight in them. He leaned harder, a silent vow. He would hold the watch when her strength faltered. The night passed. They endured, and when dawn bled pale through the stained glass, they were still together. The watchful guardian had kept his vigil, and the shadows, though pressing closer, had not yet broken through. The weather changed before the sky admitted it. The church felt it first, a shiver in the pipes, a thin metallic humming along the handrail, the boiler's flame lowering, as if bracing. Sister Agnes said the barometer was dropping. Rook didn't know the word, but he read the air inside the word. A weight shift, something coming. Jonah fussed all morning. It wasn't hunger, Mara knew that rhythm now. It was a whine caught in his gums, and a red crescent on his cheek where sleep had rubbed the skin sore. He chewed the corner of the blanket, and then his own fist, making little outraged sounds, as if his mouth had betrayed him. When Mara pressed a cool finger along his gum line, He stilled, surprised, and then let out a small sob that wasn't quite pain, more like a complaint delivered to a universe with an open desk. Teething, Keating said, when she stopped by, a plastic tote on her hip rattling with small bottles and folded papers. It's a storm in there when teeth arrive. Give him something firm but safe to gnaw, then pressure. It helps. She handed Mara a ring that looked like a bit of sky trapped in clear gel. Chill this, if you can. If not, the refrigerator in my head. She tapped her temple, smiling. Says anything cool will do. Rook sniffed the ring, filed it as harmless, and then lay down with his head near Jonah's feet, so the baby could kick at him without consequence. When the ring didn't satisfy, Jonah patted Rook's ear with a gravity that made Sister Agnes laugh under her breath. Poor beast, she said, promoted from guardian to chew toy. He consents, Mara answered, rubbing the dog's shoulder. He always says yes to whatever Jonah asks. Rook heard his name, and raised his eyes. Rook, Mara said again, and he felt the sound land on him like a hand that didn't need to be there to be felt. Pressure eased under his wrist. The air grew heavy around noon, heat slipping in despite winter. The strange warmth that means a storm is knitting itself just beyond the edge of sight. People moved differently in the hallway, earlier than usual, hauling blankets from storage and tucking the edges of mats away from the door. Saul appeared with a roll of duct tape, and no explanation. He tore strips and smoothed them across the lower seams of the exit, where wind liked to finger in. Keeps the draft down, he said, to nobody in particular. And the rats, on nights like this, everything tries the same door. Everything trying the same doors. Mara felt it in her stomach, a twist that wasn't hunger. She rocked Jonah with an absent motion, eyes fixed on Ms. Keating's tote, the folded papers that had thunked solid when she set it down. Say it, Mara told her. Then out loud, what are those? Ms. Keating's face did the polite blank that professionals learn for moments, when kindness could be mistaken for push. Then she let the blank drop. Forms, she said. Not the child services ones. Not yet. Alternate, a family placement through the church network. Temporary, with the option to make it less temporary, if the right promises line up in the right way.
Sister Agnes hovered without hovering, pretending to sort socks. They would keep you together, she said very softly, looking at Ruck and then catching herself. Well, they would keep the human people together. Mara felt the word snag in her throat like a stitch. Together was a good word. It also had conditions she could hear even if nobody spoke them. Dog, a woman farther down the hall said. A whisper that thought it was private. You can't have a dog in those places. Miss Keating didn't pretend not to hear. They've made exceptions, she said. With letters, with proof, with the right caseworker. Proof of what? Mara asked, voice skittering into something sharp. That he's not dangerous, that he's what, useful. He's not a tool. He is. She stopped herself before the word family came out, and sat there, stunned by how close it had been. Ruck, sensing heat where no heat belonged, pressed Jonah's blanket with his nose, and looked up at Mara. He didn't understand paper or policy. He understood the line humans draw between the things they love, and the things they're told they are allowed to love. He had stood on the wrong side of that line before. One person parting his fur like it was rope and saying, good boy. Another voice saying, no dogs. Followed by a door closing with a sound that lived in his bones for months. He made a small sound now, a humming that started in his chest and leaked into the air. Mara's shoulders settled by 2 millimeters. Let me be plain, Miss Keating said, lowering her voice so the word wouldn't spook. We can't hide forever. Not here. Not in an alley. Not in a church hallway. People are asking the wrong questions in the wrong tone. The right questions will follow. If we get ahead of them, we choose the answers. If we don't, they choose for us. By they you mean child welfare. I mean everyone who believes paper solves people. Miss Keating replied, sometimes it does, often it doesn't. I won't promise magic, but I will promise that if you decide to step forward instead of ducking, I will stand there with you. She tapped the toe. These are the first steps toward a place with a bed that is yours and a lock that is yours, and heat you don't owe anyone for. That place comes with rules. We will bend the rules until they fit, or we will find a different place. Sister Agnes set the socks down and came to sit by Mara. Not next to. She left an inch for choice. When I was 20, she said, I thought the world could be held together by my hands if I gripped hard enough. The world taught me other lessons, but one of the lessons stuck, that sometimes choosing is not about choosing right. It's about choosing who gets to be wrong with you. Mara laughed, a small shape in the back of her throat. It tipped toward tears, and then balanced, refusing to fall. She looked at Jonah. He glared at his ring and chewed it into submission. She looked at Rook. He watched the door like he could hear someone deciding whether to knock. Her heart threw itself against her ribs, once for the baby, once for the dog, once for the girl she had been before the station, whose mistakes had small private consequences, not public ones. Okay, she said finally. Bring me the forms. They spread them out on the mat, printed lines, boxes to check. Options that narrowed as you moved down the page. Name of caregiver, one said. Known health issues. Another, immediate risk. Sister Agnes produced a pen from a pocket that also held a rosary and a stick of peppermint gum. Mara filled the first lines as if writing a spell. Her hand shook at emergency contact. She wrote Agnes, and then, after a beat, Keating, and blew out a breath that was almost a sob. Next, Miss Keating said gently. Do you have a last name for the baby? Mara stared down at Jonah. Jonah, she said. The one name felt as real as any paperwork. After a moment she added, O'Hara, with a look at Sister Agnes's name tag that turned the nun's mouth into a line she pressed a smile into. Not legally binding, Miss Keating murmured. And yet altogether binding. Dog? Sister Agnes said, like someone stepping into a minefield with conviction. There is a line for animals, service animals only. Rook watched all of this with the baffled concentration of a creature tracking a scent that keeps doubling back on itself. Mara's jaws, right guardian, she said, and right that the baby's health and regulation rely on him. Right that the caregiver, her will not separate them. Right exceptions requested until the ink runs out. Miss Keating wrote, and letters, she added, sliding another sheet over, already half filled in. From me, from Sister Agnes, from the officer who walked you here, from anyone who has seen them together and understands that this isn't a pet, it's a dyad. Jonah and Rook regulate each other. She looked up. You'd be astonished how much kinder agencies are to a new word. They were wrapping the forms in a plastic sleeve. Saul's tape again, sealing more than drafts, when the hallway heard the sky crack. The first thunder rolled low. A metal drum turned by a huge hand. Then wind arrived in a single piece, as if the storm had been all gathered into one fist, and then released. The outer door rattled. The hallway's light flickered. Somewhere a panicked voice rose and fell as a sprig of stained glass in a distant window clattered. Then, stay put, Sister Agnes ordered, shifting into a gear that made everyone younger than her. Suddenly obedient. If the door goes, we move further in, not into the sanctuary. She looked up instinctively. God forgives closures, but not the foolish who cause them. The storm made rules of its own. Water shouldered at the door, and found the seams Saul had taped. Wind punched the building and laughed at its own bruised knuckles. Rook stood and stepped over Jonah. A bridge made of body, a dam made of bone. The baby's breaths hit his chest and bounced back warmer. The sound of rain arrived like sand being poured across a floor, then like pebbles, then like nails. The lights died, returned, thought about it, died again. Someone shouted from the far stairwell. Two figures banged through the side entrance. One of the volunteers, soaked to the scalp, and a man with a bandaged wrist, who had been sleeping in the last room off the corridor. Flooding, the volunteer gasped. The river's up. The lower steps have water on them. Agnes. I hear you, Sister said, already moving toward the back with a set of keys that jangled like a bell. Shut the fire doors. We'll make the hallway a boat if we have to. A boat. The idea wedged itself into Mara's chest. She wrapped Jonah tighter and Rook matched her, shoulder to knee, eyes flicking to every new noise. The building groaned. The thunder stepped closer. They didn't flood. Not yet. The church hunkered, and the worst of it passed in a horizontal rage that moved down the block and found other doors to pound. But the floor proved what could happen. Water lapped against the threshold like a tongue tasting. When it slipped back, it left a thin line of silt, as neat as a child's chalk mark. Tomorrow, Miss Keating said into the quiet that followed, the city will be scattered and distracted. Systems lose their shape for a day in weather like this. If you want to move, if you want to try the family placement, it's not a bad time. Tomorrow. The word stretched and shrank in Mara's head, like someone breathing hard. She looked at Jonah, wet lashes. the damp heat of his skin against her forearm. She looked at Rook, ears high, not trembling, waiting for her. Choice, Agnes had said, is not always about right. It is sometimes about who is wrong with you. Okay, she said. We go. That night, sleep came only in scraps. Rook dozed and woke, a metronome of vigilance. Once, the younger officer, the one with the sneaker squeak, appeared at the door, hat in his hand, a face that had lost some of its easy disrespect. We'll keep an eye on the block, he said to Sister Agnes, not meeting Mara's eyes because this was bigger than two people. Lot of cars stalled. Opportunists like stalled things. Thank you, Sister Agnes. And did not add, be the kind of man you weren't last night. She didn't need to. His ears burned anyway. Toward dawn, the storm let go of itself. The church windows went from black to pewter, to a shy kind of blue. Jonah slept open-mouthed on Mara's chest. Rook stood one last time and sampled the seams of the door with his nose. No sharp fear behind it now. Only the city, rearranged. Inside that change was another. A volunteer from the night before reached toward Jonah without looking first. It was small habit moving faster than attention. Rook moved too, less small. A step forward, body tall, teeth silent but present. A sound nothing like a bark, and exactly like a line drawn. The volunteer froze, color draining. Sorry, he whispered. Reflex. Sorry. Mara had her hand on Rook's collar. We're okay, she said to the young man. And when she released the leather, she talked into the dog's shoulder. We're okay. Rook let his posture trickle down into rest. He always would for her voice. But the moment left a tremor in the hallway, a reminder that protection can cut close to harm if you let fear drive. Mara felt it in herself too. How quickly her fingers had found the collar, how quickly her chest had tightened against the old impulse to run from rooms with rules. They were not running. They were stepping forward, papers wrapped in plastic, letters drafted, a plan plotted along unstraight lines. Rook leaned into Mara's knee. Jonah sighed and half smiled in his sleep. The kind of middle-of-the-night dream that looks like memory but is only the body practicing being alive. Outside, the city shook itself, counted its broken things, and began to sweep. Inside, they folded blankets and tucked the ring into the side pocket and gave Sister Agnes back her pen. Storms carve. They take what is loose and show it to you on the floor. They also polish what you've held on to. In the after silence, everything showed. Mara's fear and resolve, Jonah's small stubborn will to grow, Rook's bone-deep certainty that his place was wherever the baby's breath could fog his chest. None of it was perfect. All of it was enough. They were leaving the hallway. They were walking toward a door they would open on purpose. Rook went first, not because he mistrusted the world more than he trusted the woman and the child behind him, but because loving both had made him the kind of creature whose body makes a path. And as they passed the boiler, warm as a heart, Sister Agnes reached out and touched each of them with 2 fingers, the way some people bless bread, the way others check a pulse. Go, she said, and be stubborn about your belongings.